Few statements in the history of mankind have provoked as much awe, debate, and misunderstanding as the enigmatic phrase uttered by Jesus, "I and the Father are one." These words have echoed for over 2,000 years, crossing deserts, empires, and cathedrals, but the true meaning behind them has often been obscured by doctrines, inaccurate translations, and dogmas that served more the structure of power than the elevation of consciousness. But why has this phrase caused so much commotion, to the point of being one of the reasons why many sought to condemn Jesus? What was so dangerous, or liberating, about this idea of unity with God? To understand the depth of this statement, we need to strip our mind of the layers built by centuries of interpretations and dive into the pure essence of the message that Jesus conveyed not as a dogma, but as a revelation of the ultimate reality. In the time of Jesus, asserting a unity with God was a scandal of unimaginable proportions. The separation between the Creator and the created was so deeply ingrained that the mere suggestion of a man being one with the divine was seen as blasphemy. However, what many religious traditions concealed, or intentionally ignored, is that Jesus was not only speaking about himself, he was not making an egocentric statement, but pointing to a universal truth that rests in the heart of all human beings: the shared divine origin, the eternal spark that resides within each one. The use of "I" there was not personal, but symbolic, representing the higher self, the inner Christ, the unchanging aspect of the being that transcends time and body. The traditional interpretation, shaped by institutional interests, was quick to transform this phrase into an exclusivity of Jesus, separating him from the rest of humanity. However, this was not the intention of his message. On the contrary, he was speaking of a nature common to all, of a spiritual identity that does not belong to a single person, but is the essence of all conscious beings. When he said, "I and the Father are one," he was affirming the unity between the divine and the true self of each one of us, an invitation to remember our divine origin, forgotten behind the conditioned mind and the veils of illusion. In the Gnostic tradition, this phrase takes on even more revealing contours. The Gnostics understood that Christ's mission was not only to redeem humanity from sins, but to remind it of its true spiritual nature, connecting each soul to the source. The Christ consciousness for them was not a privilege of Jesus, but a state of perception accessible to all who sought inner truth. This view breaks with the traditional narrative of institutionalized religion, as it returns to the individual the spiritual power that was denied to them, proposing that the path to God is within, not without. If we observe the spiritual traditions of other peoples, we find this same idea resonating with different names and forms. In Vedanta, the union between Atman, the individual self, and Brahman, the whole, is the essence of enlightenment. In Taoism, harmony with the Tao is the ultimate goal. In Buddhism, achieving the state of Buddha is recognizing the absence of separation between the self and reality. These traditions do not contradict each other, but complement each other, and all point in the same direction: overcoming the illusion of separation and returning to essential unity. Jesus, in this context, becomes not the only Son of God, but a master who deeply understood his divine nature and lived fully in accordance with it. The phrase "I and the Father are one" thus acquires a new meaning. It is not an assertion of exclusive divinity, but a key to recognizing universal unity. When understood in this light, it transforms into a gateway to the elevation of consciousness, a bridge between the limited mind and cosmic consciousness. Jesus becomes the ultimate example of someone who dissolved the ego and merged with the mind of God, and calls us to do the same. He did not come to be worshipped, but to awaken us. He was not seeking veneration, but transformation. Historically, this understanding was suppressed by religious systems that benefited from mediation between man and the divine. The idea of a distant, unreachable God, separated from the world and his children, was created. This model reinforced guilt, submission, and the need for intermediaries, distancing people from the direct experience with the sacred. By reinterpreting the words of Jesus from the perspective of unity, we tear down these barriers and return to the core of true spirituality, the direct experience of the divine presence within us. The sentence also carries a profound psychological implication. If I and the Father are one, then there is no separation between the Creator and the creature. This means that the mind that creates the universe is, in some way, connected to our own mind. This idea is as revolutionary as it is liberating. The human being ceases to be a passive spectator and becomes a co-author of reality. Spiritual responsibility intensifies as everything we think, feel, and do becomes an extension of God Himself in manifestation. Many of the inner conflicts we experience arise precisely from the false belief that we are separated from the Source. This belief makes us feel needy, unworthy, lonely, and lost. But when we understand, and more than that, feel that we are one with the whole, a new identity is born, not based on ego, history, or achievements, but on the eternal consciousness that simply is. The phrase of Jesus, in this sense, is not a mystery to be feared, but a reminder to be lived. The language of Jesus was deeply symbolic. He used parables and metaphors to communicate truths that could not be grasped by the logical mind. I and the Father are one is one of these symbolic expressions, which can only be truly understood by those who surpass the intellect and access the wisdom of the heart. It is not about belief, but perception, a perception that emerges from the inner silence, from conscious presence, from the state of communion with life as it is. We cannot ignore the impact that this perception has on the way we live. When we internalize this truth, the way we relate to others changes completely. We begin to see the divine in the gaze of another, to recognize that there are not really others, but distinct expressions of the same being. Compassion ceases to be an effort and becomes natural. Acceptance, peace, and love flow without resistance, because they come from an inexhaustible source that dwells within us. Perhaps the greatest secret hidden in the words, I and the Father are one, is precisely this: that the great spiritual revolution does not begin with temples, dogmas, or rituals, but with the internal recognition of unity. Jesus showed us the path, not so that we would worship Him, but so that we would follow Him to the end, to the complete dissolution of the illusion of separation. He was the living demonstration of what we all are in essence. And now, the invitation is clear. Remember, live and express this truth, not as an idea, but as the deepest state of being. Since time immemorial, humanity has built invisible walls between itself and the divine, fostering the belief that God dwells in some distant, unreachable place, separate from what is human. This perception, although so widely disseminated, is a profound illusion, and perhaps the most paralyzing of all. The idea that we are distinct from the Source, that there is a chasm between creator and creature, is not a spiritual truth, but a mental construct that reached its peak in religious institutions. This separation was not born with the scriptures, but with their distorted interpretation. It's the reflection of a fragmented mind, split by fear, programmed to see itself as inferior and unworthy. Thus, the ego presents itself not just as an individual phenomenon, but also as a collective belief system, a religious ego, which has usurped the place of direct and spontaneous revelation. The birth of this religious ego coincided with the transformation of spirituality into a system. Where there was silence, dogma emerged. Where there was introspection, hierarchies were established. The experience of the divine, once intimate and non-transferable, was replaced by mediations, norms, and demands. The ego institutionalized the truth. It turned it into a product with a price, limitations, and ownership. The separated mind began to see God as a judge, not as a living presence. Thus, sacred fear arose, a reverence imbued with guilt, based on the threat of punishment. Paradise became a distant promise, not an internal reality. This distortion disconnected human beings from their divine essence and shaped a world where the spiritual quest became laden with pain, effort, and constant doubt. At the root of this illusory separation lies fear, the fear that the divine will reject us, abandon us, punish us. This fear was the mortar used to erect stone temples and walls of doctrine. It fueled submission, shaped morality, and defined spirituality as a path of suffering rather than liberation. The ego, fed by this fear, created a God in its own image, a separate being, emotionally volatile, and above all, inaccessible. This distorted model has perpetuated not by chance, but because it supports power structures. The human being, believing themselves weak and sinful, becomes easily manipulable, obedient, dependent. And meanwhile, the simple and revolutionary truth of unity remains buried under mountains of guilt and doctrine. When we look at the myth of Eden with more awakened eyes, we realize that it does not speak of a literal fall, but of the entry of consciousness into duality. The forbidden fruit represents the birth of separate perception of the judging mind, which sees itself distinct from the whole. The expulsion from paradise was not a punishment, but a metaphor for forgetting the source, love, unity. The serpent, the symbol of dual knowledge, offers the mind the illusion of control and judgment. And so, humanity begins to live in a world of opposites: good and evil, heaven and hell, me and the other, God and me. Division becomes the rule, and unity, a lost mystery. This same division is strengthened through words. Words that should point to the ineffable have come to be treated as absolute truths. Language, by its very limited nature, cannot capture the infinite. However, doctrines built on literal interpretations have come to dictate what is right or wrong, who is saved or condemned. And so truth has ceased to be lived and has become merely repeated. The word was domesticated, transformed into an instrument of separation, when it should be a bridge to the eternal. The gospel, which was born as liberation, was gradually converted into control. Enlightenment, an accessible possibility, was transfigured into a distant prize reserved for a few chosen ones. The religious ego has not only distorted the image of God, but also corrupted the image of the human being. It has made us spiritual orphans, beggars asking for crumbs from a closed heaven. It has forgotten that we are living expressions of the mind of God. By rejecting the inner divinity, institutionalized religion has created a vicious cycle. The human being feels unworthy, seeks external redemption, submits to rules, and perpetuates the idea that he is not enough. This is the machinery of separation, a system that needs guilt to function. And that's why Jesus was so threatening to power structures, because he spoke of freedom, of unity, of unconditional love. He taught that the kingdom is within, not without, that the Father is not distant, but always present. Jesus' vision was revolutionary because he dissolved all mediations. He did not come to establish a religion, but to reveal a consciousness. His message was not about worship, but about awakening. By saying, "I and the Father are one," he destroyed the distance that religion had built. He eliminated the need for intermediaries, as he returned to the individual the direct contact with the divine. That's why he was persecuted, because his truth set people free. And freedom is dangerous for any system that feeds on servitude. He showed that salvation is not in a conditioned future, but in a present choice, the choice to remember who we are. This choice begins with the realization that the ego is not real. It is an illusion created by a mind that has forgotten its source. It thrives on comparisons, judgments, and the relentless pursuit of external validation. Essentially, it is the opposite of being. When the ego dominates, presence dissolves. The present moment is rejected because the ego is stuck in the past and anxious about the future. This is the prison of the separate mind, a mind that cannot rest in the now because it believes something is still missing. The greatest heresy in this sense is not to say that we are one with God, it's to believe that we are not. The words of Jesus, when heard with an open heart, do not accuse, do not condemn, do not segregate. They invite. They invite the surrender of the false self, the giving up of the internal struggle, the acceptance of the truth that always was. Unity with the Father is not a prize, but a reminder. It is not achieved through merit, but recognized in stillness. It is beyond belief, beyond religion, beyond effort. It is the natural state of being, a state that reveals itself when the noises of the ego cease, when the mind stops resisting and the heart opens. Therefore, courage is necessary, courage to unlearn, courage to let go of inherited certainties, to question the foundations of faith built on fear, courage to return to point zero and allow oneself to feel the divine presence without intermediaries. This journey of return is not comfortable. It confronts everything we think we know, but it is liberating. Because as the illusion of separation dissolves, a new vision is born, a vision that recognizes the divine in everything, that perceives the sacred in the details, that understands that nothing is outside of the mind of God. This awakening is not reserved for mystics or masters. It is the silent call that lives in the heart of every human being. It manifests itself in moments of quietness, in flashes of unconditional love, in tears that spring up without reason, in the embrace that dissolves barriers. It is in this space that I and the Father are one becomes a living reality. No longer an ancient phrase, but an experience that transforms the way we see, feel, and exist. It is at this moment that the religious ego collapses, and in its place, the eternal truth emerges. We have never been separated. The human mind, conditioned by centuries of dualistic beliefs, struggles to conceive a reality where there is no separation. We are accustomed to thinking in terms of beginning and end, right and wrong, sacred and profane. But the Christ consciousness shatters these artificial divisions and invites us to inhabit a state where there is no fragmentation. The Christ consciousness is not an external entity, nor a figure of worship, but a vibrational frequency of the mind aligned with eternal truth. It is a state of perception that dissolves the ego, transcends time, and reveals unity with the whole. Jesus embodied this consciousness, not as an unattainable privilege, but as a living demonstration of what everyone can access. He did not come to show what only he was, but rather what we all are in essence, even if forgotten. The one mind, often confused with complex theological concepts or distant metaphysical ideas, is actually the original state of consciousness before the fragmentation caused by identification with the ego. Before the illusory separation, there was only totality, a nameless, formless consciousness, yet full, intelligent, loving, and creative. When Jesus said, "The Father and I are one," he was referring to this mind that does not fragment, that does not judge, that does not suffer with time or with the conflicts of the world. He lived in this frequency, not by dogma, but by direct realization, and his mission was not to establish a new doctrine, but to be the mirror in which we could recognize ourselves as expressions of that same universal consciousness. In Eastern traditions, such as Vedanta, this consciousness is described as Brahman, the absolute, the infinite that permeates everything. The Atman, the inner self, is not different from Brahman. It just seems to be separated due to ignorance or avidya. In Buddhism, the concept of enlightenment involves the dissolution of the illusion of the separate self and the direct perception of the interdependence of all phenomena. These wisdoms echo the same principle that Jesus expressed in Semitic and symbolic language. The Christ consciousness is thus the bridge between the human and the eternal, the channel through which the mind of God manifests in human form. It is not an exception, but a universal call. This awareness is not restricted to mystics, saints, or initiates. It silently pulses within each being, waiting to be recognized. Every act of genuine love, every moment of true presence, every gesture of compassion is a reflection of this unified mind. It's not necessary to withdraw from the world, wear robes, or recite ancient texts to access it. On the contrary, it reveals itself in simplicity, in the now, in the space between thoughts, in the full acceptance of what is. The kingdom of God is not a geographical place nor a future reward, but the inner state that manifests when we abandon the illusion of separation and return to the unity of consciousness. This understanding changes everything. When we realize that Christ consciousness is our true identity, life ceases to be a struggle for approval, success, or salvation, and becomes a spontaneous expression of divinity. Fear loses its power because there is no longer an other who can threaten us. Suffering dissolves, not because circumstances change, but because the center of perception shifts from the ego to the self. Peace, once seen as a distant goal, becomes the ground we walk on. Love, once conditioned and limited, flows freely because it is no longer something we give or receive. It is what we are. Jesus never separated spirituality from everyday life. His Christ consciousness was lived out on the streets, in conversations, in simple gestures. He saw God in bread, in water, in the fisherman, in the rejected woman, in the forgotten child. For him, the mind of God was not something reserved for the temple, but the very substance of existence. He spoke with authority not by imposition, but because he spoke from lived truth. The authority of Christ consciousness does not come from force, but from clarity. And this clarity is only possible when the ego is silenced and the mind returns to its original state of unity. Within this consciousness, there is no room for judgment. Judgment is born from the ego, the mind that sees itself as separate and seeks to protect its illusory identity. In the unified mind, everything is welcomed, everything is understood, everything is forgiven even before being judged. This is the true meaning of forgiveness, not a moral act, but the recognition that nothing real was threatened and that the mistake was just a misguided attempt to seek love. The Christ consciousness sees beyond appearances. It recognizes the Christ in every being, even when masked by fear and ignorance. This gaze transforms the world. When we see ourselves as one with the Father, the other ceases to be another. Each encounter becomes sacred, each interaction an extension of the divine. This does not mean that there are no challenges, pains, or injustices, but that there is a way to see all of this from a higher, more loving, wiser place. The Christ consciousness does not deny the world, but redeems it. It transforms perception, which is the true cause of suffering. Jesus performed miracles not because he violated natural laws, but because his mind was not bound by the limitations imposed by ego perception. Miracles, in this sense, are changes in perception. When we see with the eyes of the unified mind, we see the truth behind the forms. Healing happens because the mind returns to its integrity. Peace settles in because the internal war ceases. Abundance flows because lack was merely an illusion created by separation. Everything that seemed impossible becomes natural, not by magic, but because the impossible only exists within the fragmented mind. The Christ consciousness reveals that there is no separation between matter and spirit, between sacred and profane, between human and divine. Access to this state is not achieved through effort, but through surrender. The mind that tries to control, understand, or reach the divine pushes it away. The mind that surrenders, that silences, that observes without judging, allows the divine to reveal itself. It is in this space of surrender that the Christ consciousness emerges. It is not created, but remembered. It is not taught, but awakened. And once awakened, there is no going back to the sleep of ignorance. Everything changes, because the center of being has changed, and with it, the world changes. The world we see is a reflection of the mind we have. By accessing the one mind, we tap into a new way of seeing, feeling, and existing. Not as isolated bodies trying to survive, but as conscious manifestations of eternal love. This is the good news that Jesus brought. Not a religion, but a consciousness. Not a future promise, but a present reality. And this reality is available now, in this very moment, for anyone who dares to look within and remember, I and the Father are one. Language, created as a bridge for communication, has silently transformed into a prison. The power of words, both creative and destructive, has shaped realities, identities, and beliefs. From the earliest written records to the speeches that shaped entire civilizations, words have been used to access the sacred and also to distance it. In the spiritual context, this ambiguity is even more intense. What should reveal the mystery began to hide it under layers of literal interpretations, flawed translations, and institutionalized dogmas. When Jesus said, I and the Father are one, his words were a key to open inner perception, but they were treated as theological bars, separating the divine from the human through mental constructs and semantic barriers. Language then ceased to be a channel of experience and became a dense veil covering ultimate reality. The human mind relies on language to organize experience, but at the same time it becomes trapped in it. Each word carries pre-established meanings, cultural limitations, psychological projections, and usage histories. When we say God, for example, each person accesses a different concept, usually conditioned by their fears, hopes, or inherited narratives. The term in itself already carries centuries of religious and political baggage. And yet, the reality pointed to by this word is beyond any vocabulary, beyond any form of description. The name is not the thing named, The Word is not the experience. Thus, while we talk about God, we rarely touch Him. And this linguistic distance perpetuates the separation we are, in essence, trying to overcome. In the Hebrew tradition, the name of God is unpronounceable. The sacred tetragrammaton YHWH does not have vowels, making its precise vocalization impossible. This choice is not accidental, but deeply symbolic. What is sacred cannot be reduced to sound or shape. The name represents what is beyond the name. It is pure consciousness, the absolute being, prior to any language structure. Jesus, deeply connected to the spiritual roots of his people, understood this. When he said, "Before Abraham was, I am," he evoked this same principle, the presence that precedes time, the identity beyond form, the impersonal I am that dwells in everything. However, when we translate and interpret these expressions with a literal mind, we lose their essence and transform the sacred into theology. This tendency towards literalism is responsible for centuries of religious conflicts, heresies, persecutions, and divisions. By fixing words as immutable truths, we ignore the dynamism of spiritual experience. The symbolic language used by masters like Jesus, Buddha, or Lao Tse was turned into rigid code, when in fact it was an invitation to contemplation, to direct experience. The problem is not in the words themselves, but in the way we relate to them. When we use words as signposts, we open doors. When we use them as walls, we get lost. The prison of words lies in taking them as the end, not as the means. The word is the map, not the territory. This limitation affects not only theological understanding, but also the way we think about ourselves. From an early age, we learn to name our feelings, our identities, our stories. We create narratives that reinforce the separate self. I am like this, I can't do that, I've never been able to do that. Language builds the ego, sets boundaries, reinforces separations, and in the same way, it can be deconstructed. Silencing the mind is, in essence, undoing the power of words. Entering the space between thoughts is to free oneself from the veil of language and touch reality without intermediaries. It is in this silence that the mind of God reveals itself, not as an entity that speaks, but as a presence that is. The Logos, in the Gospel of John, is defined as the Word, the primal word through which everything was created. This definition goes far beyond the notion of speech or sound. The Logos is the creative principle of the divine mind, the original thought, the fundamental vibration that gave rise to all forms. When John says that the Word became flesh, he is saying that this creative consciousness took human form. Jesus, as a manifestation of the Logos, was the incarnation of this divine mind. But by understanding this statement literally, we fall back into separation. The invitation is not only to understand that the Word became flesh in Jesus, but that it becomes flesh in all of us whenever we align ourselves with the one mind. We are all expressions of the Logos, even if unconscious of it. That's why meditation, inner silence, and listening to one's being are such essential practices. They are not spiritual accessories, but paths of return. In silence, words lose their hypnotic power. The mind slows down. The narrative self gives way to the real self. In this space, there are no names, no identities, no stories. Only pure presence, formless consciousness, the being that is one with the Father. This state cannot be described, only experienced, and the more we try to put it into words, the more we distort it. That's why true masters speak little, and when they do, they use paradoxes, metaphors, poetry, because they know that truth does not fit into concepts. Language also influences the way we relate to collective spirituality. The names assigned to the divine, Lord, Father, Creator, King, reflect patriarchal, hierarchical, and anthropomorphic views. These terms, although symbolic, shape the way we feel the divine presence. We begin to see God as someone, not as everything. We create images, voices, human characteristics, but God is not a man, nor a woman, nor a being. He is the being. Language distances us from this understanding by trying to define the undefinable, and when we accept these definitions as absolute, we limit our capacity for direct experience. The liberation from linguistic prison is also the liberation from spiritual prison. When we stop seeking God in words, we begin to find Him in silence. When we cease trying to explain the mystery, we start to inhabit it. When we let go of concepts, states emerge. Contemplation replaces explanation. Presence takes the place of thought. And in this space, the phrase, "I and the Father are one," ceases to be a theological declaration and becomes a sensory, energetic, vibrational reality. It is perceived in the body, felt in the heart, intuited in the soul, not as an idea, but as existence. To transcend the veil of language, one must recognize its limitations without despising it. Words are useful, but they are not the end. Sacred texts are maps, but they are not the journey. Scriptures point the way, but they are not the destination. Jesus used words to awaken, not to bind. His parables were symbolic mazes that led to the center of being. But when his teachings were turned into fixed doctrines, the dynamism of revelation gave way to dogmatic stagnation. To recover the spirit of his words is to rediscover the living word within us. The reconnection with the unified mind requires a leap in perception, a voluntary abandonment of the need to understand everything with the analytical mind. It requires trust, surrender, and presence. And in this process, words begin to lose the weight they once held. Language becomes transparent. Instead of obscuring, it begins to reveal. Instead of limiting, it begins to liberate. The ego, which heavily relies on verbal narratives, begins to disintegrate. And what emerges in its place is the Christ consciousness, silent, vibrant, full. Union with the Father doesn't need to be spoken, it needs to be lived. The phrase, "I and the Father are one," ceases to be an enigmatic statement and becomes a real and transformative experience only when it is brought into everyday life, incorporated as a state of being and not as a philosophical idea. Spiritual truth, no matter how elevated, only has real value when it descends from abstraction to the ground of life. And it is here that the revolutionary power of this consciousness is revealed, not as theory, but as embodied experience. Living in unity with the Father is recognizing that everything we are, do, feel, and think is immersed in the totality of the divine mind. There is no separation between the spiritual and the mundane, between the sacred and the simple. Everything becomes a manifestation of the One, from breathing to the most common gesture. The Christ consciousness is not only manifested in visions or ecstasies, but in the way we look, listen, touch, and exist in every moment. This way of living, rooted in the being and not in the persona, requires a deep disidentification with the masks of the ego. The lower self, one constructed by traumas, memories, fears, and inherited beliefs, needs to be gently relegated to the background so that the true self, the self that is one with the Father, can emerge. This process is not a war, but a dissolution. The false crumbles as the light of consciousness penetrates the dark zones of the mind. There is no need to fight the ego, but to let it fall from starvation. When we no longer feed it with attachment, drama, judgment, and resistance, it loses its strength. And then, the state of unity begins to naturally reveal itself, like the sky that has always been behind the clouds. In this state of being, the now becomes the only possible time. The past, with its guilt and nostalgia, and the future, with its anxieties and projections, lose their dominion over the mind. The present, often ignored or rejected, becomes the sanctuary where life truly happens. It is here, in this moment, that the Father dwells, not in future promises, nor in past memories, but in the living silence of the present moment. Living in unity with the Father is to live in total attention, in continuous presence. It is to realize that each moment contains eternity, and that eternity is not a time that never ends, but the absence of time, a state where everything is fully what it is. The simplicity of this perception contrasts with the complexity of the religious systems that have taught us to seek God outside of ourselves. But living in unity does not require elaborate rituals nor accumulated merits. It only requires presence. True prayer is not made with words, but with the silent surrender to what is. Meditation is not a technique, but a return to the center. Real spirituality is not in the effort to be better, but in the radical acceptance of who you are when you are aligned with the one mind. In this alignment, the desire to control life, to understand everything, to conquer something, disappears. An unshakable trust in the divine intelligence that guides all processes emerges. This state of being reveals that love is not an emotion, but a quality of being itself. It is what naturally springs forth when there is no resistance. It doesn't need to be manufactured because it already is. It emerges when we cease the effort to be loved or to prove our worth. The love of the one mind is not conditioned, does not waver, has no opposites. It does not depend on exchanges or emotional contracts. It is a constant vibration, encompassing all, sustaining all, and transforming all. Living in unity is living in this field of love, allowing it to guide our choices, relate for us, speak for us, act for us. And in this process, the personal self becomes a clean channel through which the divine manifests on earth. Relationships experienced in this state undergo a radical transformation. We no longer seek in others the completeness that we only find within ourselves. We no longer project wounds, expectations, or needs. We begin to see the other as an extension of the one, as a reflection of our own light. Conflicts lose intensity because there is no longer a need to win, to convince, or to defend an emotional territory. Forgiveness becomes spontaneous because we no longer identify with pain. Dialogue gains depth because it comes from a quiet space where there is no rush. And coexistence becomes a fluid dance where each gesture is an expression of the living presence of the being. In this new state, humility is not subservience, but recognition. Recognizing that the separate self does not know, does not control, and does not possess what it seeks. It is about making room for the wisdom of the unified mind to guide. This humility is not weakness, but true strength, because it does not depend on image, status, or approval. It is the foundation of true freedom, as it frees us from the burden of maintaining an illusory identity. Surrender replaces effort, gratitude replaces demand, and the simple act of being alive becomes enough. Nothing needs to be added. The I and the Father are one ceases to be a mystical idea and becomes the very ground we walk on. The end of judgment is one of the clearest signs of this state of consciousness. The judging mind, which compares, classifies, and condemns, is a product of separation. When we see it as an expression of the ego, we no longer need to follow it. We can observe it without identifying ourselves with it. Judgment loses its appeal because there is no longer an other to be separated. We see everything as a manifestation of the same source, at different stages of remembrance or forgetfulness. This view does not make us passive in the face of injustice, but allows us to act from a deeper place, where compassion guides our actions, not hatred disguised as justice. The eternity of the present moment is the dwelling of being. We don't need to die to know heaven. Heaven is this state of consciousness. Hell, likewise, is merely the state of separation, of internal conflict, of resistance to the now. Heaven is not a place, but a level of vibration. And this level is accessed when we let go of the stories, the labels, and the interpretations. When we simply are, without effort, without a mask, without fear. In this space, everything is included: joy and pain, light and shadow, certainty and doubt. But nothing dominates us, because we no longer identify with what passes. We are the presence that observes everything and allows everything. Reprogramming the mind to live in this unity is not a mechanical process, but a profound reorientation of perception. We start to perceive thoughts as clouds, not as truths. We begin to live more in the body, in feeling, in breathing. Intuition strengthens because we stop seeking answers externally and start listening to the silent wisdom that has always been within. The connection with the mind of God is not built, it is recognized. And the more we recognize it, the more it becomes evident in all aspects of life. Spiritual practice ceases to be a punctual activity and becomes a way of being. We are then the very answer we were seeking. We no longer need external guarantees, validations, signs. The truth resonates within us as serene certainty. We know without needing to explain. We love without needing to justify. We live without needing to fear. And even in the face of the world's pains, we maintain inner peace, because we know that a higher intelligence is orchestrating everything. Trust is not blind, but based on the direct experience of unity. And this trust sustains us in the most challenging moments, like an invisible anchor that keeps us centered, even when everything around seems to collapse. This is the call that echoes in the words of Jesus. Not to worship him, but to follow him in the deepest sense. To take the same path back to the source. To step out of the illusion of separation and live the reality of the one. To abandon the effort of being something and rest in what we already are. This is true spirituality. A life lived from the consciousness of being, and in this state, every breath becomes prayer, every gaze becomes a blessing, every step becomes revelation. The gospel of the mind of God is not a book, but an awakened life, a life that, in silence, affirms, I and the Father are one. When we observe the universe with eyes free from the shackles of duality, we realize that everything, absolutely everything that exists, is an extension of the one mind. Nothing was created outside of it, nothing exists without it, nothing survives apart from it. Creation is not an isolated act in time, nor the product of a past and finished moment. It is continuous, alive, pulsating. The universe is being created now, at this instant, and the mind of God is the field where this creation happens. Matter is condensed thought, and each visible form is merely the densest part of an infinitely deeper reality. Consciousness is not contained in matter. It is matter that is contained in consciousness. Space, time, bodies, atoms, everything emerges from the same source, the eternal ocean of the divine mind. When Jesus said, I and the Father are one, he was not referring only to a personal union, but to an ontological truth. Everything is one with the mind that creates and sustains the whole. The separation between creator and creation is an illusion fueled by limited perceptions. What we call reality is not something fixed, but a field of possibilities that manifests according to the level of consciousness of the observer. This principle, now echoed even by quantum physics, asserts that reality does not exist independently of who observes it. The observer affects the observed. Consciousness shapes matter. The mind influences the field. What Jesus demonstrated with his actions, such as healings and miracles, were not violations of natural laws, but manifestations of a mind unified with the source, capable of altering the very nature of form by not being subjected to the illusion of separation. Creation is therefore a dance between perception and manifestation. Nothing is external to the observer because there is no isolated observer. We are extensions of the unified mind, and therefore everything we think, feel, and intend reverberates in the universal field. Every thought generates form, every emotion emits frequency, every belief shapes the world. We are co-creators by nature, even if unaware of it. Humanity's problem is not a lack of creative power, but unconsciousness about this power. We use the mind to maintain what we believe to be real, reinforcing narratives of limitation, scarcity, conflict, and fear, without realizing that we are perpetuating illusions. Creation does not cease, but faithfully reflects the inner state of the being. That's why changing the world doesn't start from the outside, but from within. Transforming reality is, above all, a shift in perception. When the mind returns to unity, everything around you begins to reorganize to reflect this coherence. Inner harmony projects itself into lighter relationships, restored health, and synchronicities that point to a loving intelligence guiding life. The mind of God is not outside the world, but within and through everything. Seeing this is awakening. Denying this is to remain trapped in the nightmare of separation, believing that we are victims of an uncontrollable external world. But the truth is different. The world is our extension. What we see outside is a mirror of what we cultivate within. Nature is one of the purest reflections of the unified mind. It does not struggle to be what it is. The tree does not strive to grow. The river does not resist its course. The bird does not doubt its ability to fly. Everything in nature lives in alignment with the intelligence that created it. Humans, however, disconnected from their essence, fight against this flow, trying to control, modify, or resist life as it is. And in this movement, they become sick, suffer, and lose themselves. Returning to the mind of God is to rediscover the flow of creation. It is to act without effort, trust without fear, be without masks. It is to live as part of a harmonious whole, not as an isolated entity struggling for survival. The illusion of chaos in the world is not a reflection of a flaw in creation, but of the disconnection between the human mind and the unified mind. The pain we see, the wars, the destruction of nature, the inequality, all of this is the fruit of a fragmented consciousness, dominated by ego, by greed, by fear. Creation, in its origin, is pure, but the way we relate to it distorts it. When we operate from the ego, we use the creative power to maintain the illusion of separation. When we operate from the Christ consciousness, we create in alignment with the greater good, with beauty, with universal harmony. The difference is not in the power, but in the direction it takes. The vibration of gratitude is a gateway to this reconnection. When we give thanks, we acknowledge the abundance present in the now, and this acknowledgement in itself expands reality. Gratitude is not a moral sentiment, but an energetic frequency that aligns the individual mind with the one mind. It is the sign that we have surrendered to the flow of life and no longer resist it. Where there is gratitude, there is expansion. Where there is complaint, there is contraction. The mind of God neither punishes nor rewards. It merely reflects. The universe responds to what we emit because it is made of the same substance we are made of. Everything communicates with everything because everything is one. Continuous creation also dissolves the concept of time as we understand it. Linear time, with past, present, and future, is a mental construct. In the unified mind, everything happens now. The past exists as memory, the future as projection, but creation only occurs in the present. This eternal instant is where everything manifests, renews, dissolves. Ego time is based on fear and expectation. The time of the self is now. That's why spiritual awakening does not occur as a future event, but as a collapse of psychological time. When the mind stops running from the now, eternity is revealed, and in it, all creation is possible. Every human being, in their essence, is an active extension of this continuous creation. We are creative sparks, portals through which the divine manifests on the material plane. The human mind, when aligned with the one mind, becomes a clear channel for the manifestation of truth, beauty, and love. The creative genius, the inspired art, the spontaneous healing, the deep intuition, all of this are expressions of creation flowing without resistance. Living spirituality is not expressed only in temples or words, but in actions, gestures, looks, choices. Ordinary life, when lived in a state of unity, becomes extraordinary. Every detail is imbued with meaning. Every moment becomes a miracle. The consciousness that sees creation as a reflection of the one mind no longer divides the world between sacred and profane. Everything is sacred. Everything has a purpose. Even what we call mistakes or failures are part of the process of returning to unity. There are no useless experiences. There are no lost paths. Everything contributes to awakening, even if in a non-linear way. Creation is not in a hurry because it is eternal, and each human being in their own time will be brought back to the memory of the origin. Suffering only exists as long as we resist this memory. Peace begins when we surrender to it. This understanding is not theoretical. It needs to be lived, felt, breathed. When you recognize yourself as an extension of the creative mind, all sense of powerlessness disappears. Life ceases to be survival and becomes expression. You are not here by chance. Nothing in you is random. Every thought, every emotion, every choice is part of the creative process. And when this responsibility is understood, everything transforms. Because creating from the consciousness of unity is creating with love, with wisdom, with clarity. It is creating the new world, not as an escape from the old, but as a revelation of the real. The call, then, is simple and profound. Remember that everything you see, touch, and experience is a manifestation of the mind of God. That there is no separation between you and the whole. That the universe is not out there, but is the expansion of your own consciousness. That living in harmony with the One is to live in a state of constant creation. That the phrase, "I and the Father are one," is not just about spiritual identity, but about the nature of reality. You create the world by perceiving the world, and by changing your mind, you change the creation. Because everything, absolutely everything, is one with the mind of God. The greatest possible revolution begins not in the streets, in institutions, or in political structures, but within the mind of each individual. It is in the invisible field of consciousness that reality is shaped, and every thought emitted by the human mind participates in the creation or maintenance of the world we perceive. By understanding that I and the Father are one, we recognize not only a spiritual union with the Creator, but also assume at the same time a profound responsibility for everything we think, feel, and manifest. Rewriting reality with the mind of God is to abandon the role of victim of circumstances and assume the place of conscious co-creator. It is to recognize that the external reality is just a reflection of the internal landscape. There is nothing out there that has not first been conceived here within, in the silent vastness of the mind. The separated mind projects suffering because it operates from fear, guilt, lack, doubt, and comparison. It views the world as if it were a constant threat, a perpetual competition, an arena where it is necessary to fight for every crumb of affection, respect, success, or security. This state of consciousness creates fragmented realities, destructive relationships, physical and emotional illnesses, and social structures based on control and scarcity. The ego's mind is at war with everything because it sees itself alone, disconnected from the source, and therefore tries to survive instead of flourishing. In contrast, the mind aligned with the mind of God does not project but extends. It does not create from fear but from love. It does not feed illusion but reveals the truth. Guilt. This emotion, so prevalent in religious and moral discourses, is one of the most potent tools of negative creation. It acts like a magnet for experiences of suffering, as it carries the unconscious belief that we deserve punishment, pain, or limitation. Guilt maintains the cycle of separation, as it prevents the individual from recognizing themselves as a full child of the Source. To rewrite reality with the mind of God, it is necessary to transcend this guilt. This is not done by trying to pay for mistakes or accumulating spiritual merits, but by recognizing that, in essence, we have never been separated from love. The mistake does not need condemnation, but a correction of perception. This is the true redemption, remembering who one is and letting go of judgment about oneself and others. When perception changes, the world changes. That is the miracle. It is not a supernatural interference coming from outside, but an internal shift that completely alters the way we see and, therefore, live. Jesus performed miracles because he saw beyond form. He did not see the blind, the paralyzed, or the sinner. He saw the complete being, perfect, and one with God behind the appearance of suffering. And his faith in truth was so powerful that reality bent to this vision. Miracles happened not by imposition, but as a natural consequence of pure vision. This is the key to true transformation, not trying to change what we see, but changing how we see. Perception aligned with love generates a new creation. The healed mind does not fight with reality. It understands it as a reflection and a sign. If something uncomfortable arises, instead of reacting, it observes. Instead of attacking, it investigates. Instead of resisting, it welcomes. And in this movement, it transmutes the energy of fear into wisdom, pain into compassion, limitation into expansion. This is the silent work of those who live with the mind of God. Not to directly alter the world, but to allow the world to change by being perceived with new eyes. Healing occurs at the level of the mind, not form. And for this reason, it is always accessible. It does not depend on time, space, or circumstances. All it requires is a willingness to see in a different way. Abundance is the natural state of the unified mind. Scarcity, at any level, material, emotional, spiritual, is a perceptual distortion fueled by the belief in separation. The Creator knows no lack, for everything that is required is already present in the field of existence. Living in abundance is not about accumulating, but aligning with the frequency of giving and receiving. It is recognizing that life is a continuous flow, where everything circulates, everything renews, everything is provided as consciousness expands. True abundance is not the result of external effort, but of internal openness. It is not an achievement, it is a consequence. When the mind remembers that it is one with the source, the need for struggle ceases, and supply flows naturally. Prosperity, in this state of consciousness, ceases to be an end in itself and becomes an expression of the self. Money, resources, opportunities become tools of manifestation, not symbols of personal worth. The healed mind does not seek to prosper to prove its merit, but because it understands that manifesting goodness is part of the divine purpose. Nothing is withheld, because there is no fear of loss. Nothing is idolized, because there is no confusion between means and ends. The mind of God is prosperous by nature, and its creation reflects this abundance when there is no interference from the ego with its limiting beliefs. Rewriting reality with this mind is living in peace with the flow of life, trusting in the intelligence of the whole. True faith is not blind expectation, but inner certainty. It does not wait for external results, but rests in the internal reality of unity. Faith in this context is not belief, but recognition. It is the mental state that knows, even without proof, because it feels the truth beyond appearances. With this faith, reality no longer needs to be forced. Time loses its tyranny. Anxiety dissolves, and the now becomes sufficient. The mind of God is not restless. It observes, welcomes, creates, and trusts. And those who align with it begin to live with this powerful serenity that demands nothing, but transforms everything. The Holy Spirit, often described as a mystery, can be understood as the symbol of the healed mind, the bridge between the ego and divine consciousness. It is the part of the mind that still remembers the truth, even when the surface is in conflict. It is not an external entity, but an internal function. Its voice is soft, but constant. It does not accuse, does not pressure, does not demand. It only whispers the direction of love, even in times of chaos. It is the translator of God's mind to the human mind. Listening to it is to listen to the truth that frees, that guides, that dissolves fear. And the more we listen to it, the more reality changes, not by magic, but by coherence. Peace, in this new state of creation, is not the absence of challenges, but the constant presence of trust. It is knowing that everything has a purpose, that everything is a lesson, that everything contributes to the return to unity. A peaceful mind does not need to control the outcomes. It acts with wisdom and surrender. This peace is the soil where new realities germinate. It is the fertile field where the seeds of divine intention bloom, and it is only possible when we abandon the attempt to create with the separate mind and surrender to the superior intelligence that arranges everything with love. Rewriting reality with the mind of God is not a task for the few. It is the call of every soul. Everyone without exception has access to this reconnection. It doesn't matter the past, the history, the failures, or the pains. The truth of unity remains intact, waiting to be remembered. There are no steps, no hierarchies, no privileges. There is only the choice to see differently, to think with love, to create from the being. And when this choice is made, everything reorganizes, because the universe responds not to what we say, but to who we are. And when we are one with the Father, all creation bows before this divine coherence. Even in the face of the spiritual clarity that resonates in the statement, "I and the Father are one," many feel incapable of experiencing this truth not due to a lack of knowledge, but because of a deeply rooted fear. The fear of unity is a silent force that permeates the human psyche, even though it is rarely recognized by this name. The mind, accustomed to separation, fears the dissolution of its constructed identity, fears losing control, fears disappearing into the vastness of being. This fear is not logical, it is existential. It does not stem from reason, but from the illusion that we are merely a body, a story, a personality. When unity is mentioned, the ego perceives its own death, albeit symbolic, and reacts with all its weapons, doubts, resistances, distractions, rationalizations. And so, the return to the One is indefinitely postponed, not for a lack of path, but due to resistance to the final step. This paradox is central to the spiritual journey. While we long for peace, fulfillment, and absolute love, we cling to old patterns that keep us fragmented. We seek the divine, but we fear truly finding it, because we know, even if unconsciously, that this discovery requires the surrender of everything we believe we are. The ego doesn't want to be transcended, it wants to survive, even at the cost of suffering. Therefore, it creates domesticated versions of spirituality, empty rituals, rehearsed speeches, rigid dogmas, that maintain the appearance of pursuit, but ensure that the real encounter with unity never happens. The spiritualized ego is the guardian of separation, disguised as a devotee, master, or seeker. Personal identity is built on past experiences, emotional memories, and repeated stories. Undoing this identity to inhabit the unified consciousness seems, to the ego, an unbearable sacrifice. Who will I be if I am not my name, my profession, my pain, my struggle? Who will I be without my history of victories and defeats, without my attachments, without my certainties? These silent questions are at the heart of the fear of unity. The ego is willing to live unhappily, as long as it continues to exist. Pain is bearable, dissolution is not. For this reason, many prefer the known prison to the infinite silence of freedom. And so, they continue to seek heaven with their feet tied to their internal hell. Institutional religion often reinforces this fear with images of an external, judgmental, separate God who demands blind obedience and grants favors based on conduct. This representation not only feeds the illusion of separation, but also makes unity a threat, as if uniting with God meant disappearing, being nullified, losing free will. Spiritual freedom, then, is sold as something dangerous, reserved for the enlightened, unattainable for common mortals. The sacred becomes a privilege, and fear disguises itself as reverence. But the truth is that union with the one mind does not eliminate the individual. It reveals them in their purest form, free from conditioning and attachment to the false self. False humility is another trap that shields the ego from encountering unity. It manifests as self-denial, as a constant discourse of unworthiness, as a cult of suffering. We were taught that being small is being spiritual, that acknowledging our divine nature is arrogance, that desiring freedom is a sin. This deep conditioning prevents us from seeing our true nature, because it's not about exalting the ego, but transcending its illusion. Recognizing unity is not an act of vanity, but of courage. The courage to let go of what we are not, to cross the void of uncertainty, to walk in the dark until the inner light shines by itself. Attachment to pain is another major hindrance to the awakening of unity. Many people have built their identities around suffering. Pain has become a companion, a reference, a justification. I am this way because of what I've lived, they say. And by keeping this narrative alive, they also maintain separation. Because suffering is born of the ego, it arises from resistance to what is, from denial of the truth, from internal conflict. But the cunning ego transforms pain into identity, and once identified with it, the human being begins to fear healing, because to heal would mean to lose the role, the status, the story. That's why, often, awakening is preceded by major crises, because only when the old self collapses can the light emerge. Unconditional love, which is the natural vibration of the unified mind, poses a direct threat to the ego's control system. The ego survives through emotional contracts, conditional affection exchanges, subtle manipulations. When true love enters, this system collapses, because love asks for nothing, demands nothing, needs nothing. It simply is. And this simplicity scares, because it dismantles games, reveals lies, dissolves walls. The ego doesn't know what to do with unconditional love. It tries to turn it into obligation, into romance, into doctrine, but it can't imprison it. And so, When unity approaches, the ego tries to retreat, raise barriers, create distractions. The fear of love is in truth the fear of freedom. The liberation from fear requires presence, not fight, not repression. Fear should not be defeated as an enemy, but illuminated as an illusion. When we look at it with love, it begins to dissolve. When we feel fear without judging it, without running away, without denying it, it reveals itself as a passing cloud. The fear of unity is fundamentally the fear of recognizing ourselves as whole. And this recognition does not occur by force, but by surrender. When we cease the struggle, when we rest in presence, when we say a quiet yes to the now, the light of the unified mind begins to shine through the cracks. And then we realize that what we feared the most was, in fact, what we desired the most. The world as we know it is structured on separation. All its institutions, economic systems, social relations, cultural practices are imbued with the belief in fragmentation. To reject this belief is to swim against the current. It is to deconstruct everything we have learned. It is to look at reality and see beyond the form. That's why awakening is solitary at first. Not because we are alone, but because we are ceasing to belong to the old paradigm. Friends drift away, routines change, interests transform. It's the dark night of the soul, but it is necessary, because only in the emptiness of deconstruction can the new be born. And the new is not a new ideology nor a new religion. It's a new way of being. A living, silent, loving presence that doesn't need to assert itself, because it knows who it is. This new being is not in a hurry, is not afraid, has no past. It simply is. And by being, it transforms. Where it arrives, it brings light. Where it touches, it awakens. Where it looks, it sees. This is the being one with the Father. Not superior, not inferior, just one. And its existence, in itself, is prayer, is healing, is blessing. It doesn't need to teach with words, because its life teaches. It doesn't need to convince, because its presence convinces. It doesn't need to seek, because it has already found. When we overcome fear, when we let go of attachment to separation, we do not become less human. We become fully human, beings that feel, that cry, that make mistakes, but no longer identify with any of that. Free beings, because they are no longer defined by their stories. Whole beings, because they have remembered that they are one with everything. This is the revelation. This is the end of the search. No longer chasing after God, but resting in Him. No longer trying to be light, but accepting that we already are. No longer struggling to become, but allowing ourselves to be. And in this being, everything aligns. Everything orders, everything illuminates. When Jesus pronounced the words, "I and the Father are one," He did not inaugurate a new religion or propose a new worship. He was not seeking followers who would venerate Him as a separate and unattainable deity, but brothers who would recognize through Him the truth that dwells in all. His words were not a symbol of exclusivity, but a beacon for collective awakening. What He lived, embodied, and expressed is now available to all humanity. The Christ consciousness, far from being the privilege of one, is the original state of the human being before forgetfulness. The final revelation is not in an ancient text, in a stone temple, or in external rituals. It is in the inner return to the consciousness that never separated from the source. This return does not require displacement, effort, or merit, just remembrance. And this remembrance is the living gospel. Not written with ink, but with presence. Living this revelation is not about adopting a belief, but dissolving all beliefs that block the perception of truth. The one mind cannot be known through logical reasoning or theological analysis. It reveals itself when we cease trying to explain it and simply surrender to being. The state of unity is not achieved. It is accepted. It is not built. It is allowed. It already is and always has been, but the fragmented mind, busy with comparisons, judgments, and expectations, cannot perceive it. When the mind quiets, when the heart opens, when the present is fully embraced, then reality unveils itself. And in that moment, everything changes without anything needing to change. The view transforms. The world remains the same, but we are no longer the same ones who see it. Daily life, when illuminated by this awareness, becomes the true sacred field. It is not the retreats, monasteries, or pulpits that reveal the presence of the divine, but the now lived fully. Washing dishes, taking care of a child, taking a deep breath in the face of a challenge, listening attentively, walking in silence. All of this becomes an expression of divinity. There are no spiritual tasks and mundane tasks. Everything is spiritual when done in unity. The gospel of God's mind is not a book to be interpreted, but a state of being to be lived. In it, every act is a prayer. Every gesture is an extension of love. Every word is a reflection of truth. And thus, life becomes a constant liturgy. This way of living does not demand moral perfection nor blind obedience to commandments. It only requires presence and authenticity. The Christ consciousness does not impose itself as an ethical model, but as a pure vibration that naturally dissolves everything that is not love. There is no effort in being good, because goodness flows spontaneously from those who are aware of unity. Judgment ceases, because everything is understood as an expression of the one in different stages of consciousness. Anger is not denied, but welcomed and transformed. Fear is not fought, but illuminated. The shadow is not rejected, but integrated. In this living gospel, there is no condemnation. There is only constant remembrance of who we truly are. The return of the son to the Father's house, as described in the parable of the prodigal son, symbolizes this awakening. It's not about geography, but about consciousness. The Father never drifted away. It was the Son who, identifying with the separation, believed himself to be lost. But when he decides to return, he discovers that he never left home. The spiritual journey, no matter how long and painful it may seem, always ends with the realization that we never left the source. We just forgot about it. The memory of the divine is inscribed in the human heart, and no pain, trauma, or sin can erase it. It just hides, waiting for the moment to be rediscovered. And when it is, everything reorganizes. The mind aligns, the body harmonizes, the spirit expands. In this new state of consciousness, the gospel ceases to be a rule and becomes a mirror. It does not dictate what to do, but reveals who we are. It does not demand behaviors, but inspires transformation. It's like a clear mirror that, when fearlessly looked into, shows the original face before the mask. Spiritual practice ceases to be an obligation and becomes a celebration. Prayer is no longer a plea, but communion. Meditation is no longer an escape, but presence. Faith is no longer blind belief, but direct experience. Truth is no longer sought outside, but recognized within. The ego, with its dramas and defenses, falls silent, and life reveals itself in its fullness. Love, in this context, ceases to be a romantic or moral ideal. It becomes the force that sustains everything. It is in every cell, in every atom, in every silence. It doesn't need to be created, just unblocked. When the filters of the conditioned mind dissolve, love flows like a free river. It doesn't choose who to reach. It doesn't protect itself, doesn't demand, doesn't manipulate. It simply is. To love in this state is to see the other as an extension of the one, to see the world as a reflection of the being, to see oneself as a temple of the divine. And this vision transforms everything. It heals, it liberates, it awakens. The purpose of existence in the light of the unified mind is not to achieve something, but to be a living presence of the divine, to be a channel of goodness, to be a reflection of truth. This does not require titles, recognition, or notoriety. It only requires wholeness. And when we are whole, even without words, even without grand deeds, we touch lives. Because the vibration of being one with the Father is irresistible. It penetrates where arguments fail. It transforms where techniques fail. It heals where medicines do not reach. It awakens where logic does not convince. The silent presence of someone awake is more powerful than 1,000 sermons. Jesus came to remind us of this. He didn't ask for temples, dogmas, or institutions. He simply asked that we love one another, that we recognize in each other the same essence, that we bear fruit, that we live in spirit and truth, that we free ourselves from guilt, fear, and separation, that we let the kingdom manifest through us. He did not found a religion, he embodied a state of consciousness. And this state is accessible to everyone. It doesn't matter where you are, who you were, what you did or didn't do. The mind of God is within you, waiting to be recognized. Christ lives within you, awaiting space to express himself. The Father has never been far away. The final revelation, therefore, is not new. It is the oldest of all. It is not hidden in secret books, but in the silence of the heart. It will not be brought by a new master, but awakened in each one. It will not come with signs in the sky, but with light in the gaze. The new world will not be imposed, but emanated. It will not be built with weapons or systems, but with consciousness. And this consciousness is already here, now, available, real. It only takes a yes to being, a yes to love, a yes to the now, a yes to unity. And in this yes, all creation responds, because when a child remembers who they are, the entire universe bows in reverence. If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. This is not a phrase for idolatry. It is a statement to live by. To see the Father is to see with the eyes of unity. It is to perceive the divine in the ordinary. It is to recognize that everything is an expression of the unified mind. And by living this way, we become the living gospel, the light of the world, the salt of the earth. Not because we seek to be, but because we stop denying what we already are. And so, in silence, the eternal phrase is fulfilled. I and the Father are one. No longer as an idea, but as a living reality, as a state of being, as the ultimate truth, as the inevitable destiny of every soul that dares to remember. Before you go, tell me in the comments, at what point in your life did you most feel that you and the Father were one? Share with us. Your experience could be the breath another soul needs to awaken. Here at Minds Unfettered, each comment is part of a collective manifestation of consciousness, and together, we create a living current of expansion. And if you felt the calling vibrate in your heart, don't stop here. The next video will reveal a forgotten ancestral route, the Book of 33 Steps. The hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment is already on your screen. Click now and continue the journey with us. We are all minds unfettered, and the truth, it lives within you.